Thank you very much, Aaron. There's a few things I'm just reflecting on. A good friend of mine, a farmer in Lancashire, has a little note next to his phone in the office which says, "Don't say yes when you really mean no." Just before he picks it up, he has to read it before he picks it up. One of the things that Aaron discussed, and I think it ties in with the previous presentations as well, is that in Aaron's experience in Australia and New Zealand, that this discussion that we're having here was part of the everyday discussion about farm management. And I want you to think about that when we've got some questions now for Aaron, but also when we leave the room. How do we get to a point where it becomes more of a discussion that we're having in general, whether that's on health and safety or whether that's on mental health and well-being? So, with some questions from the floor. Rachel.
Hi, thank you, Aaron, for that. It's Rachel Holliston, West Riding. It's something we're talking about in the North East quite a lot. And as an example, last week I had a local group meeting. And it was a conversation at the end of it all. Wife comes up to me and says, "Really enjoyed tonight." "Oh, great, lovely to see you." "Yeah, I've got to get him out." "What do you mean you've got to get him out?" "Well, we haven't been anywhere for so long now. He didn't even know that's his best mate over there. They grew up together, didn't even know his dad had died. And I'm really worried about him. But he's had a pint tonight and he's had a natter tonight and I feel a lot better now and I think he will as well." And it's typical. Every meeting you go to, there seems to be that sort of conversation happening at the end of it. How do we, as individuals, as farmers, how do we open that conversation, or do we wait for that conversation to come to us? I'm confused as to how we tackle it as an industry, as individuals, as an organisation. And can anybody give us any pointers on that? What's the best way of tackling that sort of thing?
Do you want to answer that now? And then we've got one from Ollie as well. But do you want to?
If I understand, you're asking what is the best way to approach somebody to ask.
How do you start the conversation?
Well, I think we're starting it today. In as the gentleman said earlier, this is the first time the NFU's done anything like this, and when an industry leader starts talking about it and communicating it, I think that's a great start. And the more and more that we talk about it, the more we erode the taboo, the stigma, the uncomfortableness that I think you're hinting at. And it's as simple as that, I would say, on that way. Just keep talking.
I'm sorry, I think the problem is really that for us here, if we see those situations coming up, we can do something about it. You've taught us quite a bit. I'm talking about a member of staff who I think is suffering from depression. How do I contact it? How do I bring it up with him?
Yes, so that's about, again, having a conversation with him about how sitting down and trying to really tease out what are the issues that he's having and how that you're working with him to how you can... Sorry?
He gets up and walks out.
He gets up and walks out. Yeah.
It might, just a thought off the top of my head, it might be a conversation to have maybe not in an office. If you mean walking out or the farm kitchen or something like that, it might be a conversation to have when you're doing a job, rather than I want to talk to you about whatever. That could be something to help, or it might be, I've had experience before of somebody who didn't really want to take any time off out their holiday entitlement. And I said, "I'm sorry, you're not a hero if you don't take your holidays. It's really important you take your holidays." Some people might have some personal experience that they can bring to it as well. I think that can help. Ollie first, and then we'll come to Andrew.
Two things really. Just you're saying how do you ask someone? I don't know whether I'm doing it right, but I lost a friend from depression about 18 months ago, and now I look at all my friends slightly differently. And when I ask them, are they all right? They always say, "Yeah, I am." But then I look them in the eye and say, "Are you really?" And I often find that I get a better answer that time. It was one thing really for HSE. Are you working on anything to do with this kind of stuff that Aaron's been doing about depression agriculture? Because it is a very isolated industry.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. It's something that is, it's an important topic for us. It's one of the things that I was commenting to somebody earlier on, is that when we've been working with the farming industry so far, we've been struggling even to get messages across about safety. And if you go from safety and then start talking about health and then you go from health to mental health, people are further and further away. The comment earlier about if you'd put this event on before, you'd have had an empty room. I've had a whole career of I don't get invited to dinner parties, and if I do, it's a table for one in the corner. So even as an organisation, we're trying to deal with it. Nationally, we've got a programme that's starting to look at mental health, and we're trying to work how do we then bring that into agriculture.
Is that not the biggest cause of death in agriculture, though, is mental health problems rather than suicide, rather than PTO chef guys? Tractors.
The statistics around that suggest that is a big problem. I have to look at it as a regulator and say the bit that we see is the work-related deaths. The suicides, the mental health problems, that side don't get reported in the same way. If you actually look at it, there's an awful lot of machinery accidents that happen on the road that get classed as road transport, not as work-related, and that gets very blurred. So the strict answer as a workplace regulator is that bit that happens outside the farm isn't ours. Holistically, yes, it is, because it's part of that, and how do we deal with it as part of that big picture?
Just before I come to Andrew, just a bit of context as well. There was a group secretary who worked for NFU, had a period of time off with depression, and he wrote a piece in British Farmer and Grower when he came back to work, all about it. And the number of people that went up to him after he'd written this piece and they'd read it and said, yeah, I feel a bit like that myself sometimes. And that's the powerful bit. So actually, if you're thinking about opening up a conversation, you might have experience yourself. Maybe you don't know how to talk about it. But if you open up, if you've got some of your own experience, it makes it more acceptable. Because this is not something, you know, we talk, if you're feeling well, you go to a doctor, don't you? Well, it's no different if you feel like this. And I think, you know, the number of people in the room, we lead from the front on it. And if if you're in the room, you have experience of it yourself, you have a responsibility to try and talk about it with other people, if you feel comfortable to do that. Andrew.
Thank you, Adam. I suppose I'm like everybody around here. I'm a farmer myself. At the times you put the hours in because the weather thwarts you and you have to make time when weather comes good. But last summer I was talking to a friend of mine, and her son was working for a contractor. This lad was doing 115 hours a week. And I just suddenly thought, what the hell have we got ourselves into when we've got a business and we call ourselves professionals, where we're expecting people to drive expensive pieces of kit and do 115 hours a week. There is something fundamentally wrong with the whole of the way our business runs. A truck driver will be locked up for that, but yet we take it as a given. I haven't got an answer to it. I've thrown the question open, but it's something I'm very uncomfortable with. And certainly, you see them running around us around the AD plants and all the rest of it, and then some of these lads are working very long hours. And I just want to know, is the legislation in place if something happens, or is it something that we maybe should look at?
I think probably Ed might answer this at the front here.
I'm just going to add a comment to that, and I've spoken to Rick about this before. Amongst the younger generation, it's almost a competition. Who can do the most hours a week? And that mentality has got to change. And it gets ridiculous. And working these long weeks, and the fact that you're writing on your timesheet amongst your staff, oh, I've done more hours than you. That mentality has got to change.
I mean, I completely agree that level of hours is absolutely ridiculous. Anyone in the room would think that. All I can say is that what I see on the best farms and the good performing farms is those that insist every 9 days, it might not be every 7 days, every 9 days you're going to have 2 days off. That's our working patterns. So those employers that are getting it right will look at it in that way. And it has to become that cultural thing. The word was mentioned earlier. How have we started this conversation without talking about culture? We are talking about changing the attitudes and behaviours across an industry, and hopefully the conversation that's taking place in this room now, you are part of that conversation because you recognise it needs to change. And I think that graph I showed that said we think we're starting to see the signs of improvement, my personal observation after 29 years of working in agricultural health and safety in one form or another is at last your industry looks as if you're taking it seriously, and I'm very reassured by that. We will still hear those stories of the 115 hours a week, and it should be everybody else that should be shouting, my God, why is this happening? The industry should be kicking up a fuss about that, not just individuals or the regulator or the NFU. Everybody should be looking and saying that's just not acceptable.
A question at the back and then one. We'll take them both together, please. One at the back first and then gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Gillian Vandermeer from the South East. One of the problems, I think, today is it's interesting looking around this room and looking over the top of the conference hall this morning. Everybody's welded to their phones. Everybody's tapping away, and they're more interested in what's happening online or social media than actually what's happening in real life. And one of the problems is that a lot of people need to socially interact more. They were saying about social connections. I think within farming families, we always had that thing called the kitchen table, where everyone sits down for a meal and they get together. But one thing I would like to say, it's not always the farmer that has mental health issues. And it's one thing saying stress, but when you get down to mental illness, you actually are probably not going to be able to help because you are too close, and it can really descend into deeper and darker places. You need to have help, because you can go to the doctor, but unless that person voluntarily takes them, they won't do anything. I was extremely fortunate that actually what happened was I actually had the police round in the end, and it was my son, and they managed to calm him down and talk him and help him. And that interaction eventually got him into the doctor. The problem is we need something where, I know we have the RABI and we have FCM, but we need somewhere that like that gentleman said, what do I do? Where you can actually go and say, I think this person's got a problem. You can't do it to the doctor. The other problem is if you do have a mental health illness, and I'm saying illness as opposed to stress, we're going beyond stress here. The lack of funding in the NHS means that your likelihood to see someone in psychiatry or psychology is you're going to have between possibly a 1 or 2 year wait because of social lack of funding. The organisations were backing up people, and many of us, we have sons and daughters, young people who are bound to have had mental issues, whether they're working on the farm or not. And it cannot be addressed because of the lack of funding, and therefore it's within your family, and you have to deal with that on top of what's happening in your family business. So I think something be set up where families or employers can contact somebody, a partner of the FCN, who can then take control.
Okay, I have a question just in front here, and then I've got Tim and Richard Betton, and we're going to be late for coffee, and I've got one at the front as well. As long as everybody's all right. Okay, we'll keep going.
Thanks. Tim Price, NFU Mutual and the Farm Safety Foundation. As the insurer of most people here who farm, we unfortunately see the consequences of a lot of farm accidents and claims. As Rick mentioned, we very rarely are surprised by what's happening. It's almost always PTO shaft falling off a roof onto something hard, livestock, or getting involved with a machine while it's still running. Well, those are the causes. The increase happens in the times of stress. Harvest, lambing, when people on staff are not there, when the family's sort of got another thing happening. And I think farmers have got sort of an ingrained sort of folklore that you keep going, and that's ingrained that that's what you're supposed to do. So the question is it time to change a bit and have some heroes who stopped using a machine during harvest because the brakes didn't work, stopped doing hours that were over the top, and to sort of make those the examples, not the ones that worked 135 hours and kept on bailing after they'd caught their hand in the power shaft. And will that sort of just bring these changes that could take some of the mental pressures off farmers as well?
I think that's about culture change. I've got Richard Betton. Tim, I'm really sorry I'm going to have to leave because I've got one at the front as well. But we're going to continue over coffee because we're not taking our jackets off, remember. Richard Betton first, then Tim, and then one at the front. And then
Thank you, Adam. I just wanted to say something about a culture change here. We already had mentions of people spending long times on mobile phones. We even have a conference app this year. More and more communication is done electronically. And in an industry where most of us are working in isolation, or our staff are working in isolation, the most important thing you can give to somebody else is your undivided attention and time. I think this is what we're talking about, is about how the industry can help itself. There are support organisations like FCN, where independent people who are not known to somebody who needs help are available and can give their time. But as an industry, there's a lot that we can do ourselves. As Rachel said, listening to somebody after an NFU meeting who wants to talk but doesn't know how to. And I think a lot of us don't actually know how to listen. It's about time to start. Thanks, Adam.
Tim, and then at the front, and then we'll do some summing up.
I was just going to say, Adam, that some of the greatest leaders in this country have had depression, like Winston Churchill and a lot of others, and it's a very common thing. And I was really wanting to speak to the lady at the back. I couldn't know who it was. Sorry about that. But your issue about funding for your son, there's some great charities out there now which helped me when I was in my hour of need. In Norfolk, it's called Yana. You're Not Alone. And they're now moving into Suffolk, and they've got a great template, totally confidential, and access to funding to fund help for those people that need it, straight away.
And a question at the front just here.
Thank you. Alice Singleton from Young Farmers in Lancashire. I just wanted to respond to the lady who spoke earlier. We in Lancashire recognised the issue of farmers not attending the doctors or not wanting to go and speak to someone, and so we helped through a big walk from Clitheroe to Blackpool. We helped fund the start-up of a charity called Field Nurse, which we now have a qualified nurse in both Gisborne and Clitheroe auction marts twice a week, and we are helping to expand that to go to other auction marts all around the country. And by doing this, it means that doctors don't want to go and sit in a doctor's waiting room. So instead, the doctor's going to them and helping them. And we've seen the statistics, and I'm proud to be a trustee of the charity. And we've seen the statistics, and they are fantastic. So, you know, this should be round out throughout the rest of the country because we've seen the process and it's looking really good.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly... I'm going to sum up 2 or 3 points and then we're coming back to the panel. So, some things for me really, what Aaron said, and it's the same with HSE. In other parts of the world, or perhaps in other parts of the country away from where you are, the discussion that we've had today is part of the everyday discussion on farm management. It's so important. Thinking about resilience in the widest sense, we've got sessions on environmental resilience, financial resilience. It's a buzzword from politicians. We need to think about our resilience and safety, but also our mental and well-being resilience as well. One final thing as well is that hasn't been mentioned is we've spoken a lot about absenteeism in work. You know, what happens if you're not on the farm? But there's also something that I've recently read from government about presenteeism. That means that you are at work, but your mind's elsewhere. And you know, that I think that's probably a challenge on a lot of farms when it comes to health and safety and mental well-being. So we're going to go down the panel. I've only pre-warned Rick, so maybe Rick can speak for HSE, and Aaron's got a bit of thinking time. And it was one of the questions that we had on the app. What would be your top 3 things that farmers can take away? What do they do when they get back?
Okay, top 3 things, and I'm going to keep them simple, because there's the first one. There's a campaign you'll have seen, Safe Stop. If you get off a machine, turn the engine off, handbrake on, controls in neutral, take the keys. That would prevent 80% of the machinery accidents on farms. Now, there will be people in the room going, that's not practical, it doesn't work every time, and there'll be a million reasons I don't want to do it. But if you get to the point you are so uncomfortable leaving the machine running that you're conscious, we'll have achieved a lot. A bit like if you didn't wear your seatbelt. That's a quick, simple one. We've talked a lot about safety. Protect your health. Lung disease, musculoskeletal disorders on farms are a massive cause of ill health. It is bigger than the number of injuries that you're seeing. And you don't notice it today, you notice it in 20 years' time when it's too late. Speak to your suppliers about what's the right sort of dust mask for you. Those of you guys in the room that I can see with beards or you've got a bit of 5 o'clock shadow, dust masks won't work for you. So make sure you're getting the right thing and you're actually protecting your health, not just think you're protecting it. And the final tip that I would give is the easy one, and I think it will overlap in the sort of things we've been talking about in both sections, is talk to each other. What we found with a lot of this things with the research we've done is sharing advice, sharing top tips, and something Matt didn't mention from the research, farmers are better at spotting risks on somebody else's farm than they are on their own. So go and nosy round your neighbours and help each other out, and we can move this industry forward.
Aaron, I've rather sprung it on you, but what would be your top 3 things?
Well, I'd echo that, of course, and what Richard said as well, so about talking and listening and making an effort to talk about this issue with other people. Also, maybe asking yourself, give a flavour of certain things that evidence has shown can help support our well-being, and we've all got our particular things, activities or strategies that we also follow. Is there something that I can commit to, simple step that I can take that's going to help support my well-being? And the third one was, I think everybody put the number of the farming help in their phone. And you have the details there on the on the literature on the chair. So everybody put that number in the phone and remember that the help is out there as well.
Thank you. One final bit from Tom, and then we are going for coffee.
Okay.
Tom.
Thank you. We've had a lot of talk the last part of the session about changing culture and about things that we can do. One of the things that we can do today is that if you look at, everyone should have one of these cards. You can commit to doing something, changing something in your business when you go back. So what we would like you to do is just put one idea on here and then stick it on that blue board down there. So that could be, I'm going to follow the safe stock procedure. What would be really good if somebody would accept the challenge about limiting hours. If somebody would put themselves up for that and make themselves a champion, we will make sure that you are actually made that champion. You are actually put out in all our communication channels as somebody that we could all aspire to in terms of changing businesses and controlling hours. So if somebody's up for that, I'll be really happy to see that. Thank you.
One final thing that I've just decided the NFU is going to do is we're going to gather all of the best practice that we've heard in the room. This has been recorded. We've got an example of field nurses in Lancashire. We had Tim's example in Norfolk. And I think actually we've all learnt something here. Well, there's no reason why everybody shouldn't know about this. So I think we have a job of work to do, which we'll work on, Tom, don't worry. It's not a job just for you. We'll work on it together to make sure that we've got all of this type of stuff in one place. So I think that leads me to say, I'm sorry if you had a question on here or you had your hand up and we couldn't get to you, but thank you very much for coming. Please keep your jackets on, go and have conversations, stick a note on the board, and you're all going to have your picture taken when you leave the room with your jackets on. So Tom's going to coordinate that and we're going to mill around just out there and then we're going for coffee. So thank you very much.